So I don't have any real structure for this, quite deliberately. This is really an experiment just to see if we do a video call, will people come on the video call? Do people want to come on a video call? I'm generally totally against video calls because it means communicating with humans in a non-textual format, which is something I try and avoid as a general principle in life. But it seems like something which is a nice thing to do, especially as, we have a community of people all over the world. As I said on my videos, everyone's going through a lot of different stuff right now. So I think it's nice to be able to connect and see some human faces. And this is a bit of an experiment of whether this is, a direction Exercism might take. Do we do these and tell the whole community and end up with 400,000 people on one of these, which could be fun? Do we start doing things like webinars where we talk a bit more and we can have more Q&As on the side? And do we have these sorts of sessions where everyone can just join them? But yeah, I'm just going to open up for people to talk and to introduce themselves and to ask questions about V3, to pick my brains, to pick anyone else's brains that has thought a lot about this. And then we can, if nobody has anything to talk about, I'll just talk shit at you for an hour and you'll all be bored. So your choice. So does anyone want to kick off by asking any questions or saying anything?
This is Alex. I watched your video and I had some questions about the reward system that you're wanting to set up. So I guess there's two kinds of users, right? There's people that might be more on the beginner side or more on the intermediate side that haven't had any compelling reason to attempt to mentor. And then there might be people that, for whatever reason, are interested in mentoring. And right now, there's no mechanism like on Stack Overflow to mentor, to, in some sense, rate the mentors. And so if you incentivize people to mentor, I'm just curious if that might cause people that wouldn't otherwise mentor to do that, and if that would cause a problem or how you might manage that.
Yeah, it's an awesome question. So this whole area about reputation, credits, gamification, through that sort of mechanism are things that we've been super wary of, for exactly the sort of reasons you mentioned. One of the great things about Exercism is that the people that contribute to it do it because of the intrinsic motivation of helping others. The thing we've always been really wary of is adding any sort of extrinsic motivation where you get motivated by money or you get motivated by something, that means it's not just about helping each other and learning from each other. So that's something that's sort of underlining a lot of the thinking that's going into this. So I think the first thing is that the reason for getting reputation and credits, they're going to be different systems. I can talk a little bit more about that if you want, but you get reputation, which is just an everlastingly incrementing sort of thing. And then you get credits, which you get at the same rate, but you then actually spend within the ecosystem. So the key thing is that the sort of spending of those credits will only be used on getting more back from Exercism. So that's just one sort of scene setting thing. I think one of the key things is that almost anyone that is intermediate at a programming language probably has something to offer someone who is beginning that programming language. And obviously, if someone's been programming for 20 years in 10 programming languages, then they probably have a real wealth of different ideas and knowledge that cross different paradigms that mean that they can be really good mentors. But actually, on the flip side, somebody who's been programming for a year and got the basics down really well, but is a really empathetic communicator and really desires to help people, can also be maybe even a better mentor to somebody who's maybe only 6 months into programming and learning something. So one of the things that I'm really keen to do is to make sure that everyone that knows enough, and that's obviously something we need to define, but that knows enough feels like they can mentor. So yes, I think it will encourage more people to mentor, but that's a really desirable part of it. But of course, that comes with the other side of how do you have any sort of quality control in this sort of system? So we haven't solved that yet. we're still working a lot of this stuff out, but the general direction will be along the lines of, if you are a student and you submit a submission or you put a submission up for mentoring, you'll attach some sort of bounty, for lack of a better word, to that submission. That might be, the numbers don't matter, but that might be like 1 point of bounty that you assign as a starting point. And if you're a mentor and you've accrued loads of bounty, you could maybe put 100 bounties on there instead, whatever. A mentor will come along and give you that feedback. There's then going to have to be some sort of mechanism that says, this mentor helped me. So at the moment we have this 1 to 5 rating system, which people get extremely venomous about from time to time, but it does have some uses. But there's a mechanism there where, was this mentor good enough? Did they help me enough? If they did, at that point, I think the credit then goes to them, the bounty then goes to them. If they didn't, I think we probably end up in a situation where the student has still lost that credit and maybe gets a second mentor to have a bite of the cherry, but that first mentor doesn't get it. So I think the actual acquiring of credits needs to have some sort of quality control from a student saying, yes, this was good enough, before that person gets that. There's other things that Stack Overflow do really well. So you unlock privileges in terms of reviewing whether an answer is good enough before it goes live on the site, for example. So for people who are publishing their first answer, nearly all of those get reviewed by more senior members of the community before they appear on Stack Overflow. And they do nice things, like sometimes they put in little trick ones to make sure that the people reviewing them are actually doing a proper job, which Erik's got caught out by before when he didn't do a proper job and got told off by Stack Overflow, but we're not supposed to tell him about that. But there's that sort of level of very manual quality control as well, where actually when you become a more respected senior mentor, maybe one of the privileges / jobs that you get is to also review new mentors' first mentorings and saying, yes, this is good enough, that can go to the student, or no, I'm going to mentor the mentor a little bit before that gets to the user. So there's sort of, I guess, different levels of how we do this. It's going to be something that definitely emerges over time. We took a first stab at mentoring in V2, and sort of, if you go back to the docs from 18 months ago, we very deliberately said, we're not engineering this. We're just going to put the most basic version of this out we can do, see how it works for a period of time, and then evolve it. And this sort of next set of things is very much about how we're evolving it. But I think we take a similar step where we take our best guess at sort of a very minimal set of features that we think will help, but then also have time set aside and resources set aside to be able to increment that. But I'm really open to anyone else's thoughts or ideas about this as well, because it's something that we haven't massively fleshed out yet. Alex, I don't know if you've got any more questions or thoughts, or if anyone else has.
I mean, beyond having a senior mentor other mentors, that's a lot of words. It almost seems like it would be nice if anyone could go in and prominent. I mean, maybe it's possible right now, but it's not prominent to be able to see what mentors have said about any given exercise. And it may be interesting if those could be rated in some way that kind of bubbled up to the top, where if someone said something particularly insightful, or like, you should keep in mind this, while it was very applicable to a particular person's solution, it might be helpful for many people to see what that mentor had to say.
So I'll touch that. Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because this is one of the things that people probably ask for the most, is being able to see what other mentors are saying so that they can learn from each other. And this was a change between V1 and V2. So in V1, everything was public. You could see any solution and see the comments on it. In V2, one of the things that we highlighted was that we felt that a really important part of a learning environment, and we saw the space between a student and a mentor interacting as a learning environment, was that it was a private space, so that students could feel like they were okay being stupid in there, and that somebody else wouldn't come along on the internet and discover that they were being stupid. Especially, there's a lot of real world scenarios here where somebody is applying for a job in Go, and they're only actually really just learning Go right now. They don't want their reviewer being able to pick that up and learn all their mistakes online and see everything. So one of the things we felt really strongly about was that that space needed to be private. And also we wanted to protect the maintainers to a degree as well, so that what they said in a space and that interaction felt like a private one-to-one interaction as well. You know, they might get to know somebody, have multiple conversations with someone over multiple exercises, and you know, develop a you know, friendship, a relationship of some sort, where maybe they're more banterous or more humorous than they would be with a first interaction with someone else. So we wanted to protect that space. So, and because mentoring's not guarded on Exercism, anyone can sign up and become a mentor. It's a slightly obtuse flow, but you can do it. There is a risk that that's public. So one of the things we did was with anonymizing mentor and student on things, so that if you just stumble across a random solution, you don't see who the student is and who the mentor is. That obviously then gets harder if you actually make it properly public, because it's very easy to see which student submission matches that mentoring conversation. So there's a lot of complexity in there that I don't feel I have a grasp on how to solve, about how to keep that learning environment safe and also make those sort of notes and those conversations quite visible. And we went for the safer option, as we found it, in keeping that learning space private, rather than maybe the more useful option of the sharing it. There are things that we're doing in terms of, for example, how the representers will work. So the representers will be where a piece of code gets so someone submits a solution, we generate a representation of that solution that has things like variable names normalized and other things like that. And then we ask mentors to give feedback on, or a mentor to give feedback on that solution, that representation. That then becomes part of a public body of knowledge. If anyone submits that solution again, they're going to get, or if someone else submits the same solution, they're going to get that same piece of feedback. So for the concept exercises where that will happen, at least, there's going to be an awful lot of that sort of thing going on. So I think that body of knowledge there will become useful. And then the other thing that I've mentioned it, but we've not spoken about too much, I think it's in the issue on V3 that lists what's changing, is about approaches. So for the practice exercises in V3, you'll be able to actually look at a approach document, sort of a wiki style article on how different people can approach different approaches to a solution, to an exercise. And so I think this will then bring out a lot of the different ideas and techniques and those sorts of things about how best to solve a solution. And then what we hope is the mentoring will build on that and help somebody work to one of those approaches that they feel is the most useful one, or have a discussion with a mentor about those different approaches, why one might be more useful than another. So, sorry, my microphone's hitting a cable. So I think we're trying to get some of that knowledge being bubbled up, but I'm still really wary of arbitrarily making conversations that I feel could be private and not private. But it's a hard one. More thoughts, Alex?
You were mentioning in the video about the twofer that there's, in that particular one, that your automation system is going to be able to give automatic mentoring. And so maybe you could make that public and rateable, and let the automation be something that can be public commentary that is bubbling up or bubbling down or whatever.
Yeah, and we're also going to be giving credits and reputation to the people that are writing the comments on the representations as well. So there's an issue on this that's interesting to read, some different ideas in there. DJ did the thing where he complains a lot, and we talked about it. But yeah, the idea of how if someone gives feedback on a representation, I think we're probably going to then give them credit every time that feedback gets used on future representations as well. And the same for analyzers. The people that are actually writing the analyzers and writing the comments and analyzers will get those credits. So there's going to be a whole piece in there that is going to be really interesting to work out and make sure is fair on everyone. But certainly I think we're building that corpus of knowledge around those exercises to the point where, ideally every concept exercise will be able to be automatically mentored in, the 99% of things. And I mean, just to put that in perspective, for TOEFL on, I think, about 6 or 7 language tracks now, every single TOEFL can be automatically mentored already, just of analyzers. So obviously TOEFL is the smallest solution, but we're deliberately designing concept exercises to be small for this exact purpose, because actually it took me probably half a day to write the analyzer for TOEFL once I'd understood everything about it. So like you can then just blast out an analyzer in your language for TOEFL for any other exercise pretty quickly. So I think we can then get that sort of coverage on there. But it's about, like you're sort of alluding to, Alex, not just making that some hidden away esoteric thing in code, but actually also making sure the knowledge in there comes bubbling up into the community, so it's a useful resource for people to see as well. Anyone else got any questions? Or Alex with more questions?
Can you say something about how you see the split between students using the web and students downloading solutions or downloading exercises as per V2? What do you hope for? What do you anticipate?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so that's a really good question. The CLI, I think, is absolutely fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as an approach. I really like it. I think the way it mimics, using Git to push files up and get code review works really well. The thing that's hard with Exercism, and I said this in the video I put out yesterday, is that when you want to try a new language, there's a lot of tooling and learning and stuff you have to do. I tried to use Go for the first time about 6 months ago. It literally took me 2 hours just to get the runtime installed, and just because I had some weird path misconfiguration, I couldn't Google for it. It just took me ages. And by the time I'd done that, I'd like given up for the evening. So the big thing that I hope the in-browser coding thing will fix is that initial step. That's the thing that I want to fix the most, that you can go in and you can try a programming language and you can experiment with it and you can see if you want to go deeper with it very quickly. There's a second use case as well, which is a huge amount of people learn on commutes. Especially, we get this feedback a lot from people living in Asia. A lot of them have very long commutes, 1 to 2 hours where they're sitting on public transport on, iPads or tablets. And they want to use that time to be doing stuff, to be learning, to be especially learning programming languages. And so it would be really nice if those people could be doing that and they could be solving those exercises actually within their browser. Now, they're still going to need an internet connection for now, but we might even get to a point where we're using things like WebAssembly, which means that they'll be able to run the test runners on their local machine, so they don't even necessarily need that internet connection to be able to do it, which would be maybe the end goal. So I think the in-browser coding, the major things I want V3 to achieve with it are removing that initial bump and allowing people to also be able to use Exercism when they're not sitting on their computer. But I also hope that it will be a good enough experience that actually you want to use it to work through a track. We're never going to hold people to that in the slightest. Like, the CLI is always going to be a really key, some very well supported way of doing this. But I hope that we're able to make a nice enough UI and experience in there that people enjoy using it, and therefore they would happily stay in that environment, especially if we're doing things like giving automated feedback in that environment. It would be nice that you can submit your code, you get your test results back in 3 or 4 seconds, and then 3 or 4 seconds after that, if your test passed, you can be getting automatic analysis coming in at you. It will feel very integrated. Something else that I'd like to explore moving forward is how much we can build Exercism into IDEs as well. It feels like things like Atom, like VS Studio, it feels like having Exercism into those wouldn't be that hard. Everything's API based. There's no reason we couldn't do that. So I think, moving into the second half of 2020 and maybe early 2021, those will be projects that we get excited about doing as well, so that you have a real wide variety of options of how you can use Exercism. Does that answer your question, Mike? Have you got a follow-on or anything?
Very much, yeah, it does answer the question, and it sounds good to me, really. I had a go with the research, and tragically, and it doesn't say much for me as a programmer, I had to retreat my IDE. So I was a bit worried that you were going all in on the in-browser experience, and it's good to hear that there'll be a place for people like me who can't live without IntelliSense and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because, so, I work in Vim, so I pretty much work in a text editor with no plugins. If you watch the videos where I did the screencast, it's just me typing, and that's fine for something like Ruby. For I used to program C# professionally, and there's no way I could have lived without IntelliSense when I was doing C#. So there's one thing Erik's talked about. There is coding support in browser that uses IntelliSense that you can plug into. So it would be really nice to explore how we can build those things into that editor as well. Again, whether that happens for launch or whether that happens afterwards, I'm not sure. But I certainly think there are going to be some languages where it feels really natural, and I think they're going to generally be the interpreted languages. And there are going to be other languages where it feels probably harder to do that. And I think certainly anything that relies heavily on IntelliSense day to day, or things where, like Rust, for example, where compilation errors are quite an important part of the coding workflow. I think those languages are harder to be outside of your natural tooling. But I feel like getting to an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then building on that and adding these features is something that we can definitely do. $14 people now. That's good.
So there was a question too by the Lost Lambda in the V3 thread, and he didn't get his audio working. So maybe we could look into that. Or did you want to do that tomorrow?
No, let's talk about it. Could somebody, one of you, just tell him just to eavesdrop, even if he can't speak? We can answer it.
DJ did that.
Excellent. I can't see him in the list of attendees, but I'm not actually sure I know his real name.
Yeah, I joined earlier, but he left, I think.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So let's talk about this. So the question here was about the difference between introduction MD and an after MD. And I think the point was that at the moment the introduction MD and the after MD feel so overlapping that somebody's not going to understand the value of the after MD when they get to it, and will almost just ignore it. And then any changes that are in there probably then get missed. That was sort of my general understanding of what he was saying. So let's talk to the purpose of both of those files. So the introduction MD aims to give somebody enough information about the concept or the concepts of that exercise that they're able to solve the exercise, both by building a bit of a mental scaffolding so that they can go and Google, but also so if there's any syntax they need to know, they can see it. So we want those introduction MDs to be short. We want them to be snappy, punchy, ideally like a paragraph or 1 to 3 paragraphs at the very most. And then we want someone to get into the instructions of the actual exercise and everything from there. So when designing one of these exercises, thinking about those introductions as just that, it is an introduction. It's these are the bare bones of things you need to know in order to be able to solve this exercise. And it's really important that it's also not like giving someone Lego pieces. That means the exercise just becomes putting those Lego pieces together. We want to be giving people ideas that can start to formulate in their heads, but that they still actually have to go and think when they solve the exercise, and they have to program when they solve the exercise, because otherwise they're not going to be learning unless they're doing. So that's the purpose of the introduction MD. The purpose of the after MD is to start to give somebody their own documentation around concepts in a language. So we haven't fleshed this out fully yet, but we're starting to see the after MD as almost like someone's personal textbook for a language. And at the end of each exercise, they're going to get information on any concepts they've learned that form the sort of chapters or sections of that textbook. But that actual after MD is going to be a living document that they can go in and edit their own version of. So we're effectively giving somebody the bare bones that they have got in the introduction, with a bit more flesh and meat on there to try and fill out a bit, but also encouraging them to personalize it, to make their own sort of notes on what they've learned and everything else. Now, we haven't got far enough down the product path of that to be able to say, this is definitely how it's going to work, this is definitely how it's going to be. But the general feeling of introduction, bare bones scaffolding, after MD, a bit more flesh and bone, a bit more flesh on the bones, and the ability for people to make notes and do their own things with it is the way that we're looking at it. So copying the introduction, adding extra bits is, a good way to kickstart it maybe. But I think the two documents over time will vary and separate enough that just organically and naturally, they don't feel like the same things anymore. I think it's really a symptom of the fact that these initial pull requests that are coming in have got the same person thinking about both, and therefore they're going to be quite similar. Whereas over time, I think they will naturally diverge, with the introduction becoming more compressed and the after becoming more expanded. That's my loose set of thoughts on that. Erik, do you have more on that?
No, that's correct. And in the after document is really a way to, you've understood the basics, but then you get to dig in deeper. So there are certain resources where you don't want to get a new student immediately reading those documents, because they go in deep and they go in all ways that you might be completely confused about. But once you get it, you have done the exercise, it might be a perfectly fine resource if you want to learn more to study it. So in the after document 2, you can really expand on linking to documents that might not be suitable for people just starting with the exercise, but once they've finished, they can dig in deeper. So that's really, really valuable. And I found that writing these introductions to be concise is very hard, but it is the more concise it is, the better I found it readable. So concise introductions to me were very positive in learning about the exercise. So I don't get distracted with all these technical details that I might not actually have to know, might be interesting to know, but I'd rather know them afterwards than beforehand. So I found,
I agree. Yeah, I think again, writing the example first of how you would solve the exercise, and then making sure that the introduction just covers the bits that are in that example. So just those small bare bones. And then it doesn't need to explain anything beyond that. There was a comment on the Ruby pull request earlier for the basics exercise, the one I did in the video. And so somebody was saying about, should we mention different types of parameters and arguments in Ruby other than just the two I did? And for me, I'm like, no, we definitely shouldn't, because someone doesn't need to know about those to solve that exercise. So we don't need to overload their mind. I think one of the problems as programmers is that we get so familiar with the language we're in and the things we're in. Things become so natural to us that we forget how unnatural they can feel the first time you're exposed to them. And so, even reading Katrina and I read the introduction to one, I think it was C#, F#, I can't remember, one of the instructions that Erik wrote. And it was pretty much the minimum that it could be, but both of us were still like, by the end, I think our heads were like, yeah, okay, this is enough anymore. And my head's just going to pop at this stage.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that in depth at all, really. But if it had been any more, it would have been too much. So I think the secret is getting the introductions to be as small as possible, and that should be the aim.
Yeah, and I think also what some people, how they are approaching writing an exercise is perhaps maybe the wrong way, where people start to begin to write the introduction first, and then they try to get the exercise designed later. And if you try to start with the introduction first, you're your natural temptation is just write tons of things, and it might include things that are not actually getting into the exercise later. So I would always suggest to start beginning with the actual exercise, and then tailor the introduction to be containing the minimal information needed to solve the exercise, instead of starting with the introduction and then doing a whole list of things that you think are important, and they might be, but they might not be as important to be included in the introduction. They could be in the after document, for example. So that's one tip that I would like to give.
I agree.
Do you think there's a place in after MD or somewhere else for stuff that's relevant to the topic that hasn't been taught because it's excluded deliberately?
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
Okay.
So as an example, the C# basics exercise uses just a class. It doesn't use a static class, which would be more idiomatic, but it introduces another keyword. So in order to keep the introduction small, we omitted the static bits from the stub, etc. But then in the after document, we do know that, hey, this is actually something that you should do with the static class and the static method. So that's an example of something where we postpone things to the after document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So another thing to take away is that it will not always be possible to have an exercise steer a student towards learning every single aspect of a concept. So there are things that a concept that you can, for example, if you do functional programming and you're trying to do currying, currying is an important concept in F#, but you don't really see it. So you can explain it, but you might also be able to explain it afterwards, saying you might not want to give it up front. But I expect other languages have similar stuff where some things are just hard to catch, to grab in an exercise, but it's useful information. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great.
Has anyone else got a question? Okay, I have a question. Are the videos I've been making useful? And if so, or if not, I guess, what videos would you like me to make? Are there any particular topics or styles, I guess, of videos? Like, do you find that just me externally posting about exercism useful, or would a tutorial be more useful? Or I don't know, how does video work as a format for people as opposed to like reading text?
I think that videos are good, but for someone that might come, that might be new, maybe an introduction would be great. Maybe even a short one. Maybe 20 minutes is a bit too much to watch for someone that is just interested and want to know more.
An introduction to V3 or an introduction to exercism in general?
Maybe 2v3. How to
Yeah,
start,
okay.
choose track, and those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So the one I made yesterday, the 4 reasons exercism sucks one. So that's sort of aimed to do that a little bit in terms of trying to give people enough of a bridge from where we are today to where we're going. But yeah, I think maybe just like a 5-minute bang, 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 bang. This is what V3 is going to be. This is what it's going to do. If you want to know more, you need to go and reach it. Like, but this is the facts. And then if you want to get started, do this. We have had a couple of people like email after watching them and sign up to be maintainers. So that's good. But yeah, 20 minutes, you're right, 20 minutes is a long time. Like I probably wouldn't watch 20 minutes of something unless I was actively already interested in it. So yeah, okay, that's cool. Thank you. Any other thoughts or suggestions from people? I'm just writing this down.
So are there any problems people had when working on V3? And if so, would that have helped if we had a video for that topic? Maybe that's one way to look at it. For example, I know a lot of people have difficulties getting started with the track. Hey, we've now done the concept extraction bit, which most people found relatively well straightforward, and it's not as easy to do, but it's at least sort of clear what you have to do. But then it's this, oh, now we're gonna have to start. So Jerry made the porting video about porting a C# exercise to Ruby. Was that helpful, for example, or are there other issues that people might be having that we could help with, for example, through a video? So perhaps not.
No, I think they are helpful. I watched Jeremy's previous video, and despite the fact he said he hadn't made up his mind what went into after MD, I found it. I kind of understood what might go in there. So that really helped me. And I think it just gives you that kind of different medium gives you a different perspective. I think maybe ironically, maybe a walk through the documentation might be something, because that's always
there's so much, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. You come to it, if you grow up with it, then that's one thing. You're kind of used to, it's rather like using GitHub. If you've not grown up with GitHub, it's kind of daunting. Whereas if you have, then you're used to all the different things that came on stream and you were terribly excited about. And similarly with the documentation. I just discovered the V3 site. I mean, I've obviously been pointed at it a dozen times, but I hadn't really looked. I discovered it today, having written my first exercise. So interesting to compare.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks. I think yeah, definitely it sounds like just some general how to get started as a contributor or maintainer videos would be helpful then. That makes sense. I'm glad it was helpful about the after MD bit as well. I think just externally processing thoughts sometimes is just helpful to hear somebody else.
It was even helpful for me because you have a different view than I have. So it's really interesting. I've been really deep into the C# bit, but then when you port it to a different language, you see these different things. You see these trade-offs you're making. So hey, I should be introducing a constant, which is one of the things I thought about, but I argued against. But you could argue for it. So that's really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think like I guess for all of us, but probably for me more than anyone, I spend so many hours, dozens of hours every week thinking about exercism, but it's often not until you actually talk to somebody about it. And at the moment, as in self-isolation, that means talking to a camera, that you actually get to know even what you think about things and sort of have those conversations. So it's useful for me just for that. Yoni has also mentioned, if I'm pronouncing Yoni correctly, on the text chat of this on the side, that videos on mentoring ideas and best practices and tips on being a good mentor would be good as well. So yeah, that's something we can definitely do. That might be fun to chat to a couple of our really experienced mentors about and get some top tips. I was thinking of doing that actually, a top tips video where we everyone can submit like one top tip on something. I thought that could be quite a fun compilation to hear what everyone's best idea is for things. So that could work really well from the mentoring point of view. So I'll take that one on board. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this? Cool. Okay, well, in that case, I think we leave it here because it's been 45 minutes and that's been a good start. I feel like this has been quite nice. I know I've talked for most of it, but I think it's been nice to see a few faces and just to be chatting to people. Do people generally think that these sorts of video calls are positive ideas?
Yeah.
It's interesting for sure.
Excellent. Okay, all right, well, let's leave it there then. I'll work out when we do the next one of these and how that's going to work. Time zones are always hard because some people like would much rather evenings, and some people much rather days, and everyone's evening and days are totally different things depending on where they are in the world. But maybe we experiment with a couple of others and try doing one of the evenings European time instead, which might include a few more people, or they probably exclude some of Asia. Cool. All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you especially to those that ask questions and things. It's been lovely to see you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.